Bridget Gormley was in 5th grade on September 11th, 2001. Her father, firefighter Billy Gormley, FDNY, was off duty that day. When he got word of the attack, he raced to his firehouse to find all the trucks had left. He and a group of off-duty firefighters grabbed their gear and requisitioned a city bus with a very reluctant driver to take them to the World Trade Center, where they arrived with the second wave of responders to search the rubble for their brothers and sisters who were trapped under it, and to help with the cleanup that would last for months. Bridget's family always considered themselves lucky that Billy hadn't been in the first deadly wave on 9/11. Then he got cancer from exposure to the dust at Ground Zero, which would ultimately take his life in 2017 after an agonizing illness. Bridget channeled her grief and anger into making a documentary, Dust, the Lingering Legacy of 9/11, that chronicles 9/11 illness and the cover-up at the state and federal level that maintained the lie that the air at Ground Zero was safe. Dust was produced by actor, director, and FDNY firefighter Steve Buscemi, and is the winner of the Best Documentary Award at the 2023 Amsterdam Film Festival. Bridget works as an advocate and lobbyist for the 9/11 community. In 2019, she traveled to D.C. with activist John Fiel and comedian Jon Stewart, where Stewart delivered his viral testimony to a House subcommittee considering the 9/11 Health and Victims' Compensation Bill, which was signed into law later that year. Bridget is also one of my closest friends, and she got me involved in a co-authorship project related to 9/11 illness and activism, which I will be announcing next week on the podcast. Welcome to Notes from a Ghost, a podcast about stories and the people who tell them. My name is Charlie, and I'm a ghostwriter. I love a good story. I hope you enjoy this one. Bridget, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. I know we've been trying to do this for months now, so good things take time.
So stoked we can make it happen. What's the, what is it Hannibal says? All good things to those who wait.
All good things to those who wait. Yeah. Our love language is Hannibal Lecter. I don't know what that says about us.
We speak in Silence of the Lambs quotes.
That's
sick.
it, babe.
All right. So one of the first episodes of this podcast was with Lila Nordstrom. And I'd encourage people, if you want to know more about 9/11 illness and how it affected a group that you don't hear about as often as the first responders, I'd suggest go and listen to her episode. She spoke a little bit about her experience of 9/11 illness. For the listeners at home who might not know anything about this, could you tell us a little bit about that phenomenon and your connection to it personally and as a filmmaker?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was a little kid on 9/11. I was in the 5th grade. You know, just a normal day. And if anybody you speak to about 9/11, they'll tell you how beautiful the day was and there wasn't a cloud in the sky. You know, it was back to school time. It was the primary elections in the city. So it was really kind of like the day where the city was coming back to its routine of, you know, summer's over and back into, you know, normality, if you will. And then, you know, 9/11 happened. And, you know, for me, Lila was a bit different because she was right in the middle of the zone and she's a little bit older than me. I think she was in high school. But yeah, so Lila was kind of in on the front line, whereas I was in Brooklyn. The school I went to was very heavy with first responder kids, you know, very blue collar town, cops, firemen, sanitation, the works like that. And as the school day went on, people were getting pulled out of school. By the end of the day, I was maybe one of 4 or 5 kids left in a class of 30. You know, kids aren't stupid. They knew something was going on, but the teachers, you know, after the fact had told us that we weren't going to tell the kids anything because so many of their parents would have been there. And also not only responders, but then you have the commuters too that go into the city to work. So it was kind of just going to open up a can of worms too early, right? They were going to wait until after the fact to deal with it. But the windows were open in school, and I remember the smell drifting in from the lower Manhattan, and the kids were asking the teachers, "What's that smell?" Again, kids aren't stupid. They're connecting the dots. They didn't know what the dots were, but they were, you know, trying to make sense of it. They were doing construction on the street, they kept telling us. And then my mom picked me up, and the first thing I went to her. I'm like, "What's going on, Mom? Tell me right now." You know, I'm old enough. Tell me. She's like, "Bridget, there was a terrorist attack. You know, the Trade Center's gone. 2 planes flew into it." And I was looking at her kind of like, "What are you talking about?" I was not expecting that at all. I don't think anybody was expecting that. I mean, even her, she was an adult. And it was the first time in my life where I looked at my mother and she was She like didn't know how to parent, right? She didn't know how to like calm my nerves. She didn't know her nerves were in her fingertips. She was still trying to figure it out. It was like the first time I saw adults, and Lila says this too, it was the first time we saw adults not knowing how to handle a situation. So being a kid's one thing, but you always look up to, you know, your parents or the older generation to kind of like guide you, and everything's going to be okay and everything's going to be safe. And that wasn't the case on 9/11. Like everybody was, you know, you look out in the street and people were walking around like zombies. But she told me the first thing she said to me after that was, "Daddy's okay. He's there." I assumed he would be there, you know, after she told me, but I didn't like the fact that she said he's okay. I thought was a very strange way to, or a very strange thing to tell me that soon, you know?
And it's so interesting how anyone who was around and at this point I've talked to a lot of people about their experience, particularly of the dust, and it's interesting how even kids were aware that there was something abnormal about the smells and people are coughing immediately is what I've heard. And I've been asked in relation to this project, like what exactly was in the dust? I mean, it seems obvious that breathing all the things that are in an office building wouldn't be great for you, but what specifically?
It's kind of a macabre joke at this point, but like, you know, me and all my 9/11 folks, we've said it so many times that it kind of rolls off the tongue. You know, benzene, lead, chromium, jet fuel, pulverized concrete. Every computer that was in that place crushed. Every piece of furniture crushed. You know, the litany of things. Asbestos, obviously, right? And then add insult to injury. Not only do you have each of these independent carcinogens, but now they're all mixed up in this super fine powder, right? Because the building went like this. It came straight down. It didn't topple over. It like the weight of everything just pulverized everything that was in the building. So you're dealing with what I learned were nanoparticles, which if they get on your skin, it just absorbs right through because they're so small. But not only the composition of the dust, but it was cooked. It was cooked for 3 months. They didn't put the fires out until December. You know, that ground was just like lava. It was just cooking and cooking and cooking. And it couldn't have been good. I mean, I speak to people that were down there, and they said it was a very electrical type inorganic. You smelt it and you knew it was bad, right? Like I know, like now I walk down Lower Manhattan and with, you know, friends that were alive during 9/11 and experienced it, and we walk by a manhole that's spewing, you know, disgusting New York City smoke up from the ground. And a friend of mine, Bruce, who was there in 9/11, he goes, "That's what Ground Zero smelled like." He goes, "That pothole, but times 1,000." So I kind of have a sense of what they were breathing in, but only like a scratch and sniff version. It's not by no means what these guys and women were breathing in down there.
It's so weird how with traumatic events, smell can be the big one.
Yeah, it's crazy. And then people, you speak to anybody that was at Ground Zero, 9/11, Lower Manhattan, they'll always reference the smell. Always.
And the other thing that I think a lot of people don't know, because, and we'd be here all day if we were going to talk about every health condition linked to exposure to that dust. There are some people whose images are associated with that day who died of it. That black woman covered in dust.
Noelle, I think her name was.
Noelle. And I think what was she called in the media? Like the Dust Woman or something like that? The
Dust Lady. Yeah. I mean, that image is kind of, it's iconic for 9/11 just to show the aftermath. But like I believe she died of stomach cancer before my dad. So it was before 2016. But yeah, she was the face of the fallout for even till today. I mean, it's iconic at this point.
And then the retired firefighter who even at that point was an older guy who had come out of retirement, who George W. Bush has his arm around him when he gives his speech at Ground Zero. He died last March, I think.
Yeah, he died recently. Same thing, cancer. I don't remember what it was, but it got him.
And then, you know, we'd be here all day if we talked about all the different people, because there are firefighters like your dad, cops, you know, and these people deserve every bit of praise and the pedestal that kind of society put them on after 9/11. But there were a lot of these unsung heroes people didn't realize were part of the cleanup, sanitation workers.
Yep.
One guy,
Yeah.
John, told me about his job was cleaning up porta potties at Ground Zero, and it's not glamorous, but he was really proud to do it, and it needed to be done.
There's a lot of jobs that I've learned over the years, recently, since my dad passed away and I got involved in all this. There are a lot of jobs that I didn't even know were a thing. Like you had people like John, you just mentioned, who was sanitation, cleaning porta potties. Con Edison was restoring power to Lower Manhattan. There was no power in Lower Manhattan. Verizon came to restore communications because all the communications were wiped out. I mean, if you speak to people, they say their cell phones weren't working, the landlines weren't working. So those guys came in and took care of that. And then you have, people that worked on movie sets came in because they had the lighting. So you had
Wow.
people that were in the film unions that came to set up these big, huge lights so people can see at night. And then they also had people from the film sets that did the water, the artificial rain, because they were trying to compact the dust a little bit so they would be able to see. So they were trying to wet it to get it down. And then you had people from all over the country show up. I mean, the West Side Highway was bumper to bumper traffic with fire trucks and cars from all over the country. I mean, everybody from Jersey showed up, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Chicago, Miami, LA. All these people came to New York. Oh, and the iron workers too. I mean,
Yep.
the iron workers were down there cutting steel,
And Chile and Mexico, places that have a lot of earthquakes, they had
Yep.
experts and dog teams who knew how to
Exactly.
find people.
Yeah. So you're looking at like it's not just a national, it wasn't just a national, catastrophe in the sense of, who was affected directly. You had the internationals coming too. I mean, and, you had internationals that died in the attack itself. So it was very, the world was hit that day for sure. And the world responded too.
When it comes to loss of life, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was 2020, where the number of people who have died of illness related to exposure to the dust has exceeded the death toll on September 11th.
Yeah, I believe it was 2020 or 2021. That number, surpassed. Now, the important thing with that number, though, is there's a little bit of an insurance policy I give with it. Those are the recorded numbers that we're aware of. So, in my opinion, I believe that number was reached much sooner than 2020, 2021, because, there are people that don't know to connect their exposure to 9/11 to their illness and death, and they're just not in these programs. The World Trade Center Health Program and the Victim Compensation Fund is where we get these numbers. So if they're living, like I said before, if you have somebody from Ohio coming to help for 4 days, and then he goes back home and he lives his life for 20 years, and then he gets pancreatic cancer and he's dead in 3 months' time, they don't know to make that link. You know what I mean? So I think the number was much higher and sooner. And today, I think we're up to 6,400 is the number of deaths linked to 9/11.
Wow. Oh, I didn't know it was even that high.
Yeah, it's high.
And something John has said to me repeatedly is that PTSD is physical as well as mental. And, if you're not sleeping, if you're under stress all the time, you're not going to fight infection as easily. You're going to be more susceptible to autoimmune diseases and cancer and all kinds of other things. And people don't always realize that when they look at I hate to use this term, but like biological impact of a mass casualty event like this.
Yeah, I think for me right now, I'm like, yeah, obviously, of course, but like I'm so ingrained in it, I'm so in my circle, in my orb, that I have to remember. It's a fishbowl effect for me, really. I have to remember I got to step outside and remind myself that not everybody sees what I see on a daily basis, and they wouldn't know to make that connection. But yeah, PTSD is debilitating. It's really bad. I mean, not only from like a health point of view, but like even the family unit. You have one broken person, it just trickles down, and then you have your kids are broken, and your wife's broken, or your husband's broken. And it's the sort of thing like where if you don't heal the wounds that you have now, you're just going to bleed on the next generation. And they're not going to know where the blood's coming from, but they just know they got to deal with it. And they don't know how. It's paramount to in the physical health realm, it is paramount to treat the mental health realm, to heal the physical.
And I think too, among first responders, especially early on, there was an attitude of, well, there's like, my friends are all dead. Why would I go to the doctor about this cough? Or, I'm not going to, I mean, people weren't reporting injuries at first
Right.
and illness because they were too busy
Hmm.
trying to rescue and then eventually recover people.
I mean, you would be aware of this because you read enough about war stories and war journalisms and things of that nature. Like if your hand is blown off, but your friend next to you is dying, like you're gonna try and help him, and you're not even gonna realize your hand's missing. So I've read so many stories about people in combat that like they just go, the adrenaline just pushes them to help these other people, and I think that's kind of what was happening at Ground Zero too. But then you also have like this guilt complex, which is tough, right? Because you'll hear a lot of 9/11 stories, and so many people weren't supposed to be working that day, or so many people, like Steven Siller was, he ran through the tunnel to get to Ground Zero and then was killed alone without a truck. So there's a lot of stories like that. I mean, even those aside, there's this huge guilt complex because, like, why did they die and I didn't? Or, like, to get into the mind of anybody that was killed that day that was a responder, I think I'll never be able to get in their head, to be honest with you, because they really will never let you in fully, I don't think, because it's too painful.
And I think there are a lot of ways where insult has been added to injury for this community. And I've heard you describe it as a community you'd never wanted to be a part of. And
Yeah.
in your documentary, you definitely get into some of the ways in which the larger response from society was not helpful. Tell us a little bit, what does Happy 9/11 mean? I know that we're in the season right now where you're doing a
Yeah.
million interviews, but I've heard you say this before. What is that?
That's just my gallow humor, getting through something. My father used to say, you laugh or you cry, so I'm trying to make the best of a bad situation. I so much my entire my career at this point has been focused on, if it's not 9/11 illness, and getting legislation passed and making sure people know what they're entitled to. And for a lot of people, 9/11 is just a day, right? It's an anniversary. You go through the motions, you have the remembrance, you pomp and circumstance, but then on the 12th it's over, right? But the thing with me and my community and the work we do, the work starts again on 9/12. So happy 9/11 might sound insulting to a lot of people, and they might think I'm being callous and whatever, and perhaps I am, but it's sort of, for us, it's like the joke, right? Like you're remembering everything just one day, right? And so we got to do it the whole year. Like, it doesn't stop for us. 9/11 doesn't end on 9/11 for me and the people that I work with and the people that are affected. There are people that are going to be living 9/11 in 2090. If you think of a little baby that was born in Battery Park City, that was exposed, they got to grow up, that baby is going to be the last person to live a life. Like, there is an end to the suffering of the people that were exposed on 9/11, until it comes, and in 2090s, what the government's given us, the feds. Happy 9/11 is just kind of like a bad joke of how to deal with a shit situation.
When it's weird, I mean, I can't imagine how that feels to turn on TV and see like specials, like anniversary specials, or to watch the towers come down like over and over and over again on
Mm-hmm.
television.
Mm-hmm. It is weird. When my father was alive, every anniversary he'd watch it and he'd just like suck it in, suck it in. He wouldn't get off the couch. He'd just watch it over and over and over again. And I don't know why he did that. I never asked him about it. I never spoke to 9/11. I never spoke about 9/11 with my father because it was something he would never discuss with me, at least while I was living at home. But every once in a while he'd make a joke and I'd look at him. I'm like, oh, Dad, that was scandalous. He's like, and he just like brushed it to the side. But it was like his way of healing. You know what I mean? Like, you laugh or you cry. And it's the fireman mentality. It's a cop mentality. When you see a lot of nasty, bad shit and the worst of humanity, you got to like deal with it some way, and that's how they do it. But yeah, I mean, I'm a bit of a junkie too, watching everything, just because I experienced it as a kid, right? And now I'm an adult, and I know a lot more than I knew when I was 11 or 12. So watching it now, it's sort of like me studying something that wasn't taught to you in high school. You know what I'm talking about? Like,
Sure.
all the little things they don't tell you about, like, pick whatever, bad moment in history that is, omitted from a book. for me, it's just like studying it. And like, I am my father's daughter. Let me put it that way, you know, and because I think ultimately that's what he was trying to do too. He's just trying to make sense of something that was so, you know, unheard of. It's like the first, you know, when has anything like that ever happened? You know?
Sure. That's been my experience. People either don't talk about it or they
Yeah.
really talk about it. And I think happy, balanced mediums don't exist when it comes to.
Not in this realm, not in this sort of thing.
Now, you responded to losing your father in a way that, I mean, was I'm really, because I remember watching like I knew you when you were going through that, but also was watching you work on your documentary, and you got right to work. And I forget now if you had already started working on the film. But how did that grieving process and the creative process like interact with each other?
I think for me, I hit the ground running so quickly because this was all, I was kept ignorant of everything, you know, by my parents and that, you know, by the greater society, because it wasn't something you discussed, right? My father and all his friends were very well aware of what was happening. They were all well aware of this dark cloud that was kind of like catching up with them, right? And it would swallow some guys sooner than later, or get guys, you know, it was constantly after people, but it wasn't discussed, right? It was never discussed. And after my dad died, I went down the rabbit holes, and I was like, holy shit, I don't, why was this never told to me? Why was I kept in the dark? And, you know, I understand a parent wanting to protect their child from the thought of, you know, the unknown and losing them. But that was really my driving force initially, was the ignorance that I was just totally kept in the dark with everything. But when people are grieving, one of two things happen. And I was told this by a couple um, therapists or shrinks, whatever you want to call them, whatever the politically correct term is for them these days, is that people either stay put or they move. So in other words, you have people that stay in bed and don't get out of bed, and they grieve in bed and they won't leave the apartment. These are the people that don't shower, they don't get out of bed, they don't go out and see their friends, they don't socialize, they isolate, and they just stay in it. And then you have people that can't stop moving, right? They'll go for walks, like Forrest Gump when he runs across America.
Yeah.
Kind of like Forrest is a mover, right? So my mother was a mover. She was constantly moving around, moving around, moving around. And I think I was the same way, but like because of this ignorance that I had and like just trying to make sense of everything, I think the project was ultimately kind of a distraction for me. You know, kind of it was helping me navigate something I knew nothing about and I should have known everything about. And I just, you know, I always said like if my dad was shot by a stray bullet in a gang fight, I would have made a movie about gun violence and gangs. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't matter what got him. It's just for me personally, what drove me was it's healing. Do you know what I mean? It helps you make sense of everything. And when I was mapping things out on the wall and I was writing everything down, things were making sense to me. And it wasn't like he died in vain so much, you know, and he was part of a bigger story and he was one of many that this would happen to. So I think for me, ultimately, the whole process was really just about keeping me sane. And it worked, believe it or not.
I want to get into that process and the writing in a minute, but I wanted to ask if was there anything you learned about him through this project that you might not have known otherwise?
We're, you know, a good Irish Catholic family, as you know, that likes to sweep things under the rug and not discuss them, and we'll ignore it for 3 generations until we have to deal with it, right? So I think that's 9/11 was kind of one of those things for my family. I interviewed a lot of his friends, right? Like in the film, one of the story, um, you know, one of the what would you call it? The story arcs in the story is this table of my dad's friends, right? So we always come back to this table to kind of introduce the new topic. And when I was sitting at that table, they were just telling stories about like the good old days and 9/11 and like vacations they went on. They were telling me these stories about my dad, which I never heard any of them, but it was kind of nice because you look at your parent and there's this tendency to mythologize them a little bit. Do you know what I mean? To put them on a pedestal and they could do no wrong and whatever. But like when I was hearing these stories, it really humanized him. And it's kind of better than the myth, because if they're human and if they did what they did, it means it was real, and it means it was more kind of like, you know what I'm trying to say? Like,
Oh
I'd
yeah.
rather believe in like the human story than the Zeus story. Zeus is a god. Of course, he's going to do that. But like, if a mere man can like do all these things, it's I think much more impressive. And then the good, the bad, and the ugly. They were telling me stories about my dad that they probably shouldn't have been telling me, but I'm happy they told me, because you want as big a sphere as you can. I mean, my dad died young. He died at 53. And when he passed away was kind of, ironically enough, just at that age where I was beginning to, I was 26, 27. So I was really coming into my adult years, and I was feeling comfortable to like approach him about discussing things that maybe I didn't feel comfortable to, the first half of my life, because I felt like I was mature enough and I could handle it, and he can handle it, and he would be real with me. But you make plans and God's laughs, and he had to go. But that's another story, I suppose.
And I guess, and one of the things that I think your film does brilliantly, one of the things I'm trying to communicate in this book that I'll talk about next week, it can get so easy to get into statistics and talk about,
Yeah.
and weirdly kind of valorizing and talking about heroism is a way to sort of dehumanize people, that like they're a certain kind of person who's almost expected to
Right.
to act courageously, and it diminishes, I think, what it takes to find that in yourself and in a flawed, human person.
Yeah, we're all sinners, Charlie, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, but the reality is, when people talk about the death tolls, whether it's September 11th or post 9/11 illness, it's it's all those conversations that are never going to happen again. It's people removed permanently from, dinners and holidays. And,
Numbers are tricky. Numbers are really tricky. I mean, I think Stalin said like one death is a tragedy, but like a million's a statistic. He was onto something. Do you know what I mean? When you start throwing numbers at things, it really clouds it, because put it this way: if you sit in a football stadium, or if you sit in like Madison Square Garden, or pick your venue, and you sit there and it's a sold out show, and it's if it's MetLife, it's 80 something thousand people, and you look around and you see what 80,000 people look like, you're like, holy shit, this is a lot of people. So now when you talk about the deaths in, some war, a tragedy or earthquake or 9/11, and you see how many like a number is, then it humbles you, but how often do we see people in mass that much? You know what I mean? So, and to your point, like each of those people has a family, has kids, has friends, has a job, has like a pursuit of life that they're trying to achieve. So, I mean, when you have to really step back, and that's why I think it's important to always remember the humanistic aspect of it, the personal aspect, the individual aspect of it, which is hard, right? I mean, of course it's hard.
Now, one thing that I think that I want to hear about with regards to like the writing process and the storytelling process is, a lot of times, like one of the things that's really tricky, I think, with tragedy or trauma, especially a well-known kind of public event, is finding the storyline, because it can be so easy to just show everybody how awful it was. But I think your film has a really good arc and really good, I don't want to use the word characters, but like you develop, like the people who are in it take us on this journey. How did you find that arc, and what was your process like?
So my disclaimer that I tell everybody, and this is to inspire people, but to also let people know that I had zero business doing what I was doing. I didn't know what I was doing. You know what I mean? Like I bought a camera and I hit the ground running. So having said that, my approach to making this film was very unorthodox. It was me calling people up being like, hey, can I interview you? With no storyline intact. So I really did the approach of just jumping in the deep end and then finding what I find. And then I come back and I assess it. And then the story, and doing it that way, kind of built itself. And then once it started building itself, I was able to insert different things like the table conversation, for example, right? So I had done maybe 10 or 15 interviews with doctors, lawyers, responders, And then I had all this footage and I'm like, okay, great. Now what? And I knew I was always going to interview my dad's friends. And then Chelsea Handler, who's actually my inspiration for this, she used to do this thing on her show at Chelsea. I can't remember which one it was, but she would always have dinner at the table with her guests in her backyard. And the camera would go around, right? And it would pick up. I'm like, that's what I'm going to do. Because I thought it was such a great idea, right? Like breaking bread, the people that you love and that he loved are all here. And like, give them a couple beers, they'll loosen up. And it was actually the best thing I could have done, because I took people that were friends for life, that were like, you know, they're warriors together, drinking beer, talking about the good old days and the bad times. You know what I mean? And if you want someone to really pour their heart out, you give them a drink and then a group of friends, and you're going to get, again, the Irish is showing in my approach, I think, a little bit. But yeah, so I just did sporadic interviews, and then I had that idea, and then I started crafting it and stitching it. And I knew these guys would be consistent because I wanted them to be consistent, because I knew my dad the best. And ultimately, why this was an elegy to my dad, it was for everybody else too, right? Like my dad's, like I said before, one of many, and there's going to be so many more after him, unfortunately. So I wanted him to be consistent, but I didn't want him to be like, you know, the poster child for this, because he wouldn't want that either. You know, I still think about what he would say about everything, and I'm sure like he'd be very happy that I did it, but he'd be like, Bridget, take me, like, enough with me. Do you know what I mean? Like, I see him behind you on your bulletin board. Do you know what I mean? Look, and there he is on mine. See, so he's like everywhere. There he is. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yeah. But, and for those listening at home, I've got a cork board behind me where I'm outlining my latest project, and watching over that, I have your father's mass card, Billy Gormley, in his what's that called? The portrait that they take of a firefighter in their gear?
There's probably there's probably a accurate term. I call it his headshot.
Love it.
For his portfolio.
Now, like, what would you say to someone who, and you know, it doesn't, maybe what they went through isn't something that's a massive current events story, and maybe they don't want to make a movie, but they want to do something. They want to turn like essentially the worst day in their life into something meaningful or documented in some way. What would be your advice on how to do that?
Well, yeah, to your point, it doesn't have to be a movie or a book or you know, anything grand like that. Honestly, like when I started this, I've always said that I just wanted to sit down with my dad's friends, because they lived during a time period that it was like, I don't know how they survived it, the 70s in Brooklyn. And I used to hear stories my entire life growing up. And I always wanted to sit with them, hear the stories, and write them down. So I knew. And so like I could tell my kids, like, oh, this crazy thing happened to my dad when he was 16 and running from the cops or whatever he was doing, you know? So even just sitting down and speaking with people, like just that oral history is huge. And I'm a big fan of it now. And I'm being more proactive about it, because, you know, the fact of the matter is, you know, death comes like a thief in the night. You don't know. I thought I was going to have that opportunity with my dad, and I never got it. I got it for like 3 days when he was in hospice, and he was not, you know, not himself. But like oral history is like, even just writing helps so much, like journaling and writing. And then after my dad died, I put these books together for my brothers for their birthday, because he died in June and my brother's birthday was in August. And I just put like these photo albums together for each of them, with pictures of them and my dad, just so they had something that was just that. You know what I mean? But it can be simple. It doesn't have to be grand, you know, by any means. I was just perhaps being a little bit dramatic. Well, not dramatic, but you know, I was just being driven by something in me that I couldn't really explain. But if you feel that, I tell people to run with it, because I did, like I said, it felt something in me. I didn't know what the hell it was. I didn't know how to navigate it, but I just, you know, the secret to begin is to begin. And that's what I did.
Oh yeah. That's come up. We had Stephen Pressfield on a couple episodes ago, and he was talking about that, and they just
it's muse, right? The muse comes. Yeah. The muse shows up, and when the muse shows up, and I love Pressfield. I read a lot of his books, but I love that he's so spiritual about the muse, because it's the sort of thing where if I read Pressfield 10 years ago, I'd be like, this guy's hocus pocus, you know, nonsense. But then you experience it, and you're like, holy shit, it's exactly what it is. what resistance is the death of the muse, right?
Yeah,
Let me tell you
yeah.
something. That's just as real as the muse too, because I can't tell you how many times I laid in bed when I was making this documentary, and it felt like a weighted lead blanket was on top of me, and it was doubt, and I'm like, I can't do this. I can't do it. But what do? You got to get out of bed. You know what I mean? So Pressfield got shout out to Pressfield. Love him. Got me through it.
Yeah, and it's really, I mean, again, I think when I would love to see you make something or write something about how you totally just were a self-taught filmmaker, and I mean, you did something I've like fantasized about doing, which is going to B&H camera with like a credit card.
But just maxing it out. I'm still paying that fucking thing off. You know that. It's been like 4 years. Yeah, it's
I love
expensive.
I love that place. It's one of those places it kind of wouldn't if you tried to explain it to someone, you would think they're making it up.
When I bring people to New York for the first time, when they're visiting me for the first time in New York, I'm like, I gotta take you to this place. You're gonna love it. It's nuts. And they're like, what is it? I'm like, well, it's this place that's run by Hasidic Jewish people, and there's like things that fly from the ceiling, and it's great. You're gonna love it. And we go, and then they're like, don't know what to expect, and they see it, and they're like, they put it on their like itinerary for their friends when they come to New York. Do you know what I mean? And they all leave with a bag too, of course. It's
Love
impossible
it.
not to.
Yeah, a shout out B&H. What's the official
B&H,
name? Photo and video or something?
B&H. There's only one B&H. You say B&H,
B
you know what you're talking about. B&H in
B&H.
New York, yeah.
Yeah, just don't they don't no don't order anything on Friday.
Yeah, it's closed Saturday,
It closed, yeah, Friday, Saturday for
Sabbath.
Sabbath. Now, your brother has followed in your father's footsteps quite recently.
Yeah, my brother Ray, he just graduated from the FDNY Academy, and something that's kind of almost unheard of, he even got placed in my dad's old ladder company, in his old firehouse. So you want to talk about a full circle tradition. FDNY is very good at that. I'm telling you, they have a sense of community that's unlike any other I've ever seen. But yeah, so Ray is now in the department, and then my brother Billy is also in the department, but he's EMS. So he's working his way up. So he's a paramedic right now, but he has the FDNY across his back. So we got two of the three. And my other brother Kevin works with the Victim Compensation Fund, right? Helping people get squared away with that. So I mean, it's really a family affair that nobody really, I don't think, planned. But again, you make plans.
Yeah, and I mean, I know I watched the Instagram stories you were posting of his graduation, and I got pretty emotional watching those. I mean, what was that like?
So he's a legacy, right? And the legacy means that you have a parent that died in the line of duty. My brother was scheduled to take the test before my dad died, and then my dad died, and then 4 months later he had to take the test. And that was in 2018, 2017. And he just got called to the job this year. So he had to wait. This wasn't like this, these things don't happen overnight. This is a process. So, I mean, the emotional thing for me in particular was not only seeing him on the job, but seeing him from the moment he took the test, being this broken kid that was like, I think he was 18 when my dad died, maybe 19. And just having to wait and wait and wait and wait and getting the letters in the mail. And then you have to go to the academy and you have to do this and do that. And then you get placed. So it was this years long process, and seeing him complete it was like a weight was finally lifted. The biggest one I can see it lifted off was my mother, right? She finally felt the weight lifted. And then with Billy, it was the same thing, he just got on sooner. But it's nice. It's nice because I think deep down when you're a kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? Little boys, usually, they want to be something
Yeah,
that's who they could be, right? Like those jobs of I could be this, the dreams of who we could be, always rescuing, saving people. So I think they were always thinking about it, and it's kind of how nice it must be to know what your dream is when you're a kid and to grow up and get it, right? How rare is that?
oh man, yeah, it's really, and and like you said, to have it come full circle to where you're,
Yeah,
I mean, literally stepping into your father's boots.
literally. I mean, the crazy thing is the probies in the house. When my father was there, the probies that came in are now the senior guys. So the guys that my father trained and like was their mentor to, they're now being the mentor to my brother. And that's beautiful. Like how that's something that doesn't really happen anymore, and they look out for them. And like, this is not a sort of job where, you say goodbye, honey, see you tonight, and they leave with a briefcase. You don't know when they're, if you don't know, right? You don't know what's in store, whether it's injury or death or something even worse, like they see, and then to know that these guys are there, like watching out for him because my dad watched out for them. It's like this continuum of brotherhood, for lack of a better word, that I really admire, and I don't see it very often, especially these days. And so when I do see it, I'm very like, I get very sentimental about it and very protective of it.
And you should be immensely proud.
It's a family Gormley, man. Of course I am.
I want to be Ray when I grow up.
Yeah, right. That's what. Yeah.
So
Just doing something right.
What are you working on now?
So right now, so the stock, we're still trying to find a home for it. So that's been my biggest thing as of recently, is finding a home for this. Project-wise, I'm not starting anything until this is done and done right and squared away, because the amount of effort and money and time that what go into something like this, I didn't know it when I started it, but if I knew what I was getting myself into, I might have had second guesses, you know what I mean? But now I'm going to learn from my mistakes. But yeah, so I'm working with the firm, with the law firm, with, you know, with Michael, making sure everyone's squared away with the healthcare and with the victim compensation fund, everybody that's affected, you know, responder and non-responder alike. I'm doing a lot of work with the 9/11 Museum, doing next gen things like getting educational plans in place for students and teaching the next generation about 9/11 and, you know, never forget what that means, the legacy of it. And then, you know, there's always a peppering of projects that come along the way too, kind of like this, which is fun always. And the news circuit and the lobbying and yada, yada, yada. It never ends, Charles. You know that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It never ends.
Yeah. That's like the good news, bad news of it, right?
Good news, bad news.
Well, thanks for taking the time, you know, between radio interviews and TV and events. Now, on a totally different note, you and I kind of have an endless list of documentary recommendations going back and forth. Are there any that people should check out? I mean, besides yours?
Our shared note that we have in our iPhone.
Yep.
What do I like? Okay, so
you told me about the tickling one, which is the
it's
crazy
funny.
shit
I swear to God, I was gonna save that one for last, but you could. So you know, since you brought it up, let's jump into it. I actually saw it with your wife in a movie theater in Ireland for the first time, and when we watched it, we both looked at each other, and everybody else in the theater was like, "What the fuck was that?" So Tickled, it's called. It's not for the faint of heart. It's a little kinky, for lack of a better word, but very interesting. Totally, like, talk about, like, you know, extortion and weird kinks. But Tickled, great movie,
for
great
people.
doc.
I won't spoil too much, but for people listening at home, a little context. So it's about a wealthy guy who set up a global network of what do you call it, porn or whatever, like basically videos of
it was
guys.
like a tickle competition. He's like, how long can you last? And of course, people, you know, thinking they cannot do the other one, they all sat there strapped to a table while they got tickled and squirmed and were filmed.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, that's right. He made it look like it was a sport or something, competitive tickling or whatever, but it was essentially, and it was just to gratify his particular thing. And the
crazy
lengths this guy went to are pretty
that's a good one. That's a top 5 for me. It's just because it's so bizarre. And then in the same jest as that one is the Voyeur Motel.
Oh Jesus, yeah, you showed me that one.
You've seen the Voyeur Motel? That's a great one. I love Herzog. Herzog's my man. That's the nerd in me, right? What else do we got? Anything Louis Theroux too. That's also kind of the glue to our relationship. Another love language we have. Anything Louis Theroux touches, I love. I would his early stuff, his early 2000 stuff, right? That's the best.
Oh my God, yeah. There's a couple that Dominique and I rewatch like all the time. And the thing that he and Herzog seem to have in common is this just incredible, like, very broad comfort zone.
Oh, they don't care.
They don't care.
They ask questions, and the interviewees kind of like look at them like, did you just ask me that? And Herzog, you know, does his voice, and he goes, tell me how you really feel about your wife's infidelity. And I'm like, what? He did it? Or whatever the topic may be. But that gives you exactly what you need for a good story. Also, shout out to Herzog. Read his book. You read his book, right?
I've got it right here.
Yes. I'm looking at it right now. One of the best things I've ever read. for creative pursuits, no matter, not just film, but anything in general. It's really, really good. One of my favorites.
There are, if you don't mind a little tangent, there are a couple of stories in there because I'm trying to have some more people on to talk about the art of interviewing because that's so central to what I do as a ghostwriter. And there are a few stories in there where he talks about how he developed kind of this sixth sense for.
Yes.
Do you remember the squirrel story about the death penalty? So you saw Into the Abyss, right?
Into the Abyss, right, yeah.
It's for those who don't know, it's a feature length documentary about a death penalty case in Texas, and everyone involved, from like the victims' families to the
executioner,
the executioner, to people who are the perpetrators, everyone. And it opens with he's interviewing the preacher who kind of administers
last rites.
Yeah, I guess they don't call it last rites. If it's whatever Protestant last rites are. I don't know, but how
stick to what I know.
Of
right?
us.
I know.
But anyway, the guy he said he was saying a bunch of religious stuff. It wasn't very interesting, and he had started telling a story before they were filming about how he like almost hit a squirrel while he was playing golf, like with his golf cart, and he swerved to avoid it or whatever. And Herzog was like, I just knew there was something more that he wasn't saying or that he wanted to say. And so he's like, kind of interrupts the guy's sermon and says, can you tell me about the squirrel? And the guy says that and then he breaks down.
Cries. I remember
starts sobbing, and he's like, I realized I could stop this death and I could avoid running over this little creature, but I couldn't stop the death that I have to deal with every day at work.
Yeah. It's deep, man. I call those slips. Those are slips, right? So a good interviewer, and this is going to be my only preachy thing I'm going to say on this podcast.
Preach.
You have to listen and listen carefully, because people will always let some tiny, minute details slip out, and you got to be aware enough to catch it, right? So Herzog heard squirrel. Why would this guy be talking about squirrels when he's got to go to a death room and administer whatever he's got to administer, right? Like, why did he bring that up? So Herzog was wise enough to know, like, squirrel, slip, grab it, run with it. I can't tell you how many people let little things slip like that, and you're going to know it in the moment, right? But it takes some adjustment and fine tuning to get there. But when you hit it, it's going to lead you down a way, because the person saying it doesn't even really know why they're saying it. It's sort of like that subconscious slip where it comes out. So there's like, and he was right, Herzog. There was something more, right? He got very philosophical all of a sudden, this preacher who was like cut and dry. And then so much so that he loses himself in the moment, and he's crying on camera. I guarantee you that guy did not go into that interview being like, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. Like, he's like, I'm not going to cry. But then Herzog brings up the squirrel, and then suddenly he's like a different man, So listen for those slips or those hints or whatever you want to call them, because that's really what's going to.
Totally. And I think, again, it helps that there wasn't an agenda here. He acknowledges that he personally doesn't agree with the death penalty. I think it's the most understated thing anyone has ever said. He's like, coming from a different historical context, I respectfully disagree. And
right.
We don't even need to say what that different context
I know.
is.
But for the people that don't know, Herzog is a man of a certain age from Germany, right? So
yes. But I think if you went in there with an agenda and sort of trying to prove a point or something, you wouldn't get a conversation like that.
They're not gonna. People know, and this is what I always say. Like, another thing I've been thinking about a lot is East Palestine, Ohio. Right? If I do have another project, I will have another project. It's gonna be there, I think, right? Because there's so many correlations between what happened in New York and what happened there. Except there is much more tragic for a lot of reasons that will take forever to get into. But I was talking to my brother about it, and I'm like, Kevin, I can't go to this place and be like, I'm from New York, like, I'm a filmmaker, let me tell you something about something. You can't do that. You have to go in there and be like, so what's going on? Like, how are you have to go in you have to know where you're going. You know what I mean? You can't go with an agenda. You can't go with like your camera in people's faces. You got to like talk to people, you got to feel them out, which is so important too, because I mean, we all live in our little bubbles no matter where we are, right? I'm in New York. I'm in the biggest bubble in the world with the thickest skin too, apparently. But you have to step outside of it, because if you don't step outside of it and see how like the other 99%'s living, you're never going to get what you need, And I think that's kind of underrated, because I see it all the time with people with cameras. They're just like too aggressive and get in people's face, or journalists that get in people's face. I'm like, you're doing this all wrong. You got to seduce them a little bit, you got to give them the trust a little bit,
Yeah, and I mean, and all the really good storytelling is on the other side of that.
Totally. Always. Always. Don't be seduced by the shiny object, that's the biggest and loudest. It's usually the most boring, quite frankly.
Oh, totally. Totally. Plus, you never know. Going back to that death penalty documentary, some of the people who you would assume would have one particular, I mean, I think of the guy who retired, like he was about to get his pension and he's like, I can't do this anymore. Yeah. Not what you would think. I mean, this guy is kind of your classic, like, Texan prison official or whatever.
Listen, man, never assume people, never make a judgment on people or assume you know them. Because even like a case in point like that, I mean, I was visiting a friend in France once in this tiny little village in like the south called Entrevaux, right? I think that was the name of it. And I was with my friend and we're talking with this guy, this older guy, total eccentric, long hair, kind of like a hippie, walked around a little hunched over, and he was so into mushrooms. He was like a mycologist. He was telling me everything about mushrooms in German, English, French hybrid.
The kind you
eat? Every kind. He was like for medicine, for hallucinations, for food, everything. He was just a mushroom guy. And then he gets up and he goes home, and my friend goes to me. He goes, "Do you know who that was?" I go, "It was whoever." He goes, "That is Himmler's grandson." So I'm sitting there. This is what I'm saying, Charlie. You can't, the stories are out there and you don't even know you're talking to them, right? I didn't want to talk about mushrooms with this guy had I known he was Himmler's grandson. Like, you know what I want to talk about? I'm like, yo, we're going to let's talk about something, But point being is like a little tiny village in the south of France. This guy's hiding and he just wants to study his mushrooms. But he comes from this legacy of darkness. And to a way, he kind of achieved it, right? Because I was sitting there oblivious. But yeah, you get outside the realm of what what you're used to, and then you start seeing all this crazy shit and these stories that are insane.
That's the best thing about stories. They're just out there waiting to be.
They're just waiting to be picked.
You need the right.
I had
bucket.
Dinner with Himmler's grandson talking about mushrooms. Like I never thought I'd tell 16-year-old me would see me doing this. It's wild.
One of the other things that I love about history. And kind of like what you said about how we are going to be burying the last victim of 9/11 illness well into the next century.
Mm-hmm.
And people are very bad at understanding the way history overlaps, the length of history. There's that famous little factoid that we live closer to Cleopatra's time than she lived to the construction of the pyramids.
Yeah, it's crazy when you look at it like that. Yeah.
Like that's how old that is. I think someone was telling me the last Civil War pension was paid out in the early 2000s.
Really?
Because you had what was he, like a drummer boy? Like they had like the kids.
Yeah, you had a 7-year-old on a battlefield drumming.
In the battlefield at like the very end of the war, but technically still veteran of the Civil War. And I guess he got married like on his deathbed as an old man to someone much younger who then became the recipient of his pension until she died in like a few years ago.
Wow. Well,
right.
There you go, man. I mean, there's a couple stories there, right? There's the love story, which I'm more interested in. But then you got the history story, and that's what that makes for such a great story. So it starts off with like Civil War guy, he's still around. Can you believe it? By the way, his bride's like 25 years old and getting a Civil War pension. You know what I mean? That's the crazy part. But I love it.
Yeah, there's an element of humility there, and Steve Pressfield and I talked about this as well. That once you understand history, you don't get to take so much credit for your more civilized views. The example that I like from Blank, is a Scottish philosopher, wrote a essay about witchcraft and how it's an example of how people go crazy as a society altogether. And I think it was like you would only need to talk to 8 or 9 people in your family tree to go back to find someone who thought that like burning witches alive was a like very
good idea.
Yeah, like we add like the highest priority.
Yeah, I think I was on the other end. I think my people are at the stake. I'd definitely be at the stake today. They'd burn my ass immediately. Like, get her out of here.
I mean,
but it's true. When you look at history, like how you said it, it humbles you, right? It's so humbling because I can't stand these people that think they know everything and then they post it. And then you're like, okay, we're going to have a discussion. And then once they realize that they don't know anything, they shut down and then they paint you as the bad guy and then it becomes an argument. And you're like, no, it's just a bigger story than what you think it is. And like, I'm not claiming to know anything. In fact, I know nothing about nothing. You know what I'm saying? In the grand scheme of things. But people are so sure of themselves. And when you start studying history, and not just mainstream history, but even like roots off, it branches off and it gets even crazier than you can imagine. Like it's so nuanced. It's probably the most nuanced thing that there is. And talk about gray space, man. Jesus Christ. And we don't even know all of it. You know, like we only know what we're told to know. There's secrets that we'll never know, you know, but how's that going to affect us at this point, right? We're just riding the wave, man. I just surrendered a long time ago. I'm total surrender, floating around.
Yeah, no, I mean, sometimes that's all you can do. And then, keep the camera rolling, get it on the record.
That's it, man. Always keep it rolling, and always never ask for permission. Always ask for forgiveness.
Wasn't that one of Herzog's
that's Herzog.
rules?
He carries a
rules.
Bolt color.
Carry the bolt cutters everywhere. Have you?
Let me tell you something. It went through my head a couple times when I was filming, so it pays off.
I bet. Have you seen there's that kind of famous clip where he gets shot with like an air rifle during the interview?
Which interview?
Yeah, someone's interviewing him, or he's maybe making a film. I'm not sure what was happening, but some just random person shot him with an air rifle.
That makes sense. That's Dax.
And he what was it he said? It was like a projectile of insignificant caliber or something like that.
He's such a poet. He's such a poet. I love the way he talks.
He was just kind of interested in the fact that someone would shoot him. He wasn't really alarmed.
He's that type of guy, right? Yeah, he's good. He's very good. I love him. I would like to have dinner with him. If I that stupid dinner party question, like who would you have dinner with? Or that dating app question, who's your true dinner guest? Herzog, for sure.
Oh, yeah, every time.
For sure. Every time.
Herzog. Cool. Bridget, thanks so much for taking the time.
Likewise, man. It's like just another dinner party for me and you. You know, I love it.
Yeah, we got to get Werner to the next one.
Yeah, we'll get him there. I'll work on it.
Awesome. If you have an epic story, I'd love to hear it. You can find me at dailyprose.com or on LinkedIn. My links and Bridget's are in the show notes. Thanks for listening.